Hello and welcome to my tutorial on painting a jam or jelly jar. If you are participating in 31 Days of Autumn, this tutorial is meant for that. If not, this is a normal watercolor tutorial, so you can totally do this if you're not participating in 31 Days of Autumn, but I did want to mention it in case you are here for that. If you are here for 31 Days of Autumn, I would love for you to comment. I love to see that people are participating in our October art challenge. Today we are going to be painting kind of something similar to this jam jar. We're not going to make it this tiny, but this kind of pattern on the top, we're going to do some fabric over it like that, but I don't have a reference photo. So if you're the kind of person that really needs a reference photo, you may want to pull one up. I am going to just go from memory as well as kind of just adding my own creativity to the kind of jam jar that I want to make. You're going to need a couple supplies. If you've never painted with me before, I always have two water cups, one for cool tones, one for warm tones. I like to have a paper towel. This is to dab off any extra water that might be on your brush. Really important. A pencil, an eraser. I like to use the gum eraser so I don't tear up the texture of my paper. Always using watercolor paper when I'm painting with watercolor. This is Arches 140 pound. I recommend 140 pound, but you don't have to use Arches. I know Arches can be a little bit on the pricey side, especially if you're first starting off. So Canson has a good one. Strathmore has like a decent paper. If you want to up your watercolor game, I say this a lot, but working on a watercolor block can really do that, especially with this high quality paper like Arches. I think Arches should sponsor me. And then of course we need our watercolors. This is my palette. It's a hot mess, but I am using a lot of red tones today as well as a little indigo to kind of make a purpley tone and maybe some browns. So not a whole lot of color variation today, but those are the colors I'm going to be using. So let's start off by drawing. I always draw a little bit darker so that you guys are able to see, but please draw as light as possible because you don't want your pencil to show through your watercolor. I'm going to start off with the top of the jar, and I'm going to kind of do this to the side a little bit. If you don't want yours angled, just make it straight up and down. And just like kind of a curved top. What I'm imagining here is, I don't know if you guys had grandparents or grandmothers that like to make their own jam. My grandmother did, and she would always put this fabric over the top, so it kind of created a little dome. And then this line right here is going to be where it cinches in around that lid. So this is essentially a mason jar lid under it, and we're going to be doing a mason jar. Hope that's not too confusing. So this is just the top, and then I'm going to make just this little second line down here, and this is going to be twine. Hope you guys can see. I'm trying to draw dark enough so you can see it, but not dark enough that it's going to show through. And then I'm just going to put these little C curves because I want this to be similar to kitchen twine that you would tie around. And then I'm going to make kind of like a loop right here. I don't need to make an exact bow, but I'm just going to do two little loops as if it's tied. Okay. Now I want to do that end of the fabric that's kind of coming out like a little skirt. I'm going to put a line out here, and then I'm just going to do this ruffled edge, however you want it to flow, and then make sure it goes over here by this loop. It's going to go behind it. Now time for the jar. Again, I'm drawing at an angle, you guys. If you want it straight up and down, feel free to do it like that. I don't know why, just in my mind, I envisioned this little jam jar tip to the side. Now I'm going to come down just straight lines that match up with the lid here, maybe a little more in since the lid would be technically out a little bit. And this is our jar. And then I just am going to make a light curve at the bottom for the bottom of the jar. And maybe just another, you know how the jar is kind of thick at the bottom? I'm gonna just make a light line because this will just be glass and not where the jam sits. And I really want to have a label on it because I think labels are cute. You can do whatever style label you want to do. Maybe you want to do like a ticket shape. Maybe you want it to be scalloped edge. That would kind of be cute. I think I'm just gonna do, I don't know what shape this is, but it's like a little circle and then little straight edges. My grandmother used to have a little briar patch and it was so magical to me. I mean, my grandmother was an interesting woman. She had like redeeming qualities, but well, we're not gonna do a therapy session right now. But anyways, that was one of my fond memories of her. Okay, and I'm just gonna put, I think it's called Bon Mamas. I'm not saying it right, it's French. But I'm just gonna do like little squigglies. I don't have to have it say something. If you want yours to say something specific, feel free to. And I'm gonna do a little edge around mine, like a little frame that will be colored. And then we'll put our jam inside our jar. Now, one other detail that I really love is, I think it's called gingham. It's that checkered pattern and it looks so cute. Instead of just doing straight lines, I want this to have some movement in it. So I'm going to do my lines kind of to the side like this, okay? So we're gonna make our own gingham. If I'm saying that wrong, I'm so sorry. And then just try to space your lines out evenly. And you might need reference for this. So as we can see, it's essentially just cross-hatching, right? We have this, and then it goes over. But the important part to make it look like this will be when we start painting. We'll have to skip one to make darker. Oh my gosh, this jam jar is leaking. Gross. Okay, and I'm gonna do the same thing. So these were flowing this way. Now the other ones are gonna flow with a little curve the other way. And same space between them, or try at least. Okay, adorable. All right, now we are ready to get started with our painting. If you have never painted with me before, I want to let you know that I work in layers typically. I do a lot of layering. That means that between layers, we have to let it dry. So I speed it up so you guys don't have to sit here and literally watch paint dry. But if you have painted with me, you know that this is how I paint, so you're probably used to it. It just takes, in my mind, you really get super beautiful depth of a painting when you use a lot of layers. There's lots of different styles out there. You don't have to paint like I do, but I personally love layering. So that's what you're gonna get here. I am going to mix up red. I'm gonna start with that jam jar first. And I want our red, this is gonna be strawberry jam, but it's not gonna be super bright red, right? Strawberry jam, because it's cooked down, it kind of has like purpley tones almost to it. You want something rich and jewel-tony. But don't worry about doing your darkest, most saturated first. We don't want to do that because we're working in the layers. So load up your brush. I'm working with a size 6 brush. And just paint in where the jam would be. And this is kind of watered down. You don't want it to be your deepest saturation because we want to save that for later. So we can give this little jar some depth. One huge thing about watercolor is over time, you will learn mastery over the water. I think that's one of the things that's most frustrating to people because you have to, in a way, be able to control the water and know how much is too much water and how much is just right. And that's frustrating for people. But once you get the hang of it, it's pretty amazing. And I used to hate watercolor, but it's like my favorite thing ever now. I paint all the time, like even when it's not client work or videos. I just love it. Okay, there's our basic color. down. And if you feel like you have any areas that are too dark, because we want this to be really light, you can rinse off your brush and then tap it dry on your towel and then just pull up some of that pigment. I'm gonna pull up some just right here because the jar would be curved, and so these areas would probably show a little bit lighter just because of the shape. So I'm just gonna pull up some of that real quick. But don't ruin the texture of your paper. If your paper texture starts coming up, that's not what we want. Now I'm going to move on to our little twine right here. I'm going to make it a beige color. So I'm just mixing up, I have yellow ochre in here, as well as sienna brown, and then maybe just a touch of indigo so it's not too bright. I want it to have that kitchen twine look. And then again, I'm just painting my first layer on here. So just paint your twine, use a smaller brush. I'm using a size 2, but this might be a little too big. I think it's okay. Now we are going to have to, well, actually, you don't want to paint anything that's next to another piece of painted art that is wet still. So we don't want to get in here because it's still wet, but if you want to paint the inside, because I don't know if you put a frame around yours, but I put a frame around mine. So I'm actually gonna paint the inside of this. I want it to be a light pink color. I think that would look really cute. I'm gonna mix up a light pink. I love to use Opera Rose, but sometimes it's just so hot pink. And recently I discovered if you mix a little bit of lavender colored paint with it, it really calms it down and gives it more of a, not really a baby pink, but more of a mellow pink than that bright, bright, hot pink. I don't know if it's gonna be the color that I want here, but we can test it out. I recommend having a little piece of watercolor paper that you kind of can test your paint on. I'm gonna add a little red just because I don't want this to be not the exact color I want, but good enough. It's gonna be really light, so I'm not too worried. But since I want this border to be white, I am gonna be a little more particular on how nice I make that edge, because I'm not going to be painting this layer again because it's a label, and a label would most likely be flat with not a lot of shadowing or anything on it. Plus, we're gonna have that hand lettering in the middle. Okay, definitely see all my pencil lines, but typically I would have erased it a lot more, but that's okay. I wanted you guys to be able to see it. All right, that's looking good. This almost feels dry because it was so light that we used. But let's go down here for that glass section. For glass, I typically like to do a light bluish gray. I have a very light blue over here that I'm mixing up with a little bit of black. To me, that usually works. And of course, we'll put little shadows of the red as well. But I'm just gonna put a light line down here and on the edge. And then I'm going to get just water and kind of mix it in so it kind of bleeds nicely. And while this is wet, I'm gonna grab a little bit of that red color, just put like a little line so it kind of blends, looks like a reflection a little bit. Perfect. Now I want to work on this pattern up here, and I would like it to be that same red on that little jar that I showed you, kind of a brighter red. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna make it pretty light and watered down, and we are going to paint across. So 1 row, paint across. And don't forget about this area over here. Again, we want it to be not crazy saturated. You guys might need a smaller brush depending on how big you drew your jam jar. Make sure this isn't wet or it'll bleed. Okay. And, oh, this kind of like went off a little bit. That's okay, because it's okay if it's a little off, because it would make sense since it's wrapped around something. All right, now up to our next one. We're gonna skip because of the white that we're gonna have to add. And we're gonna do the same thing. This is making me want to make my own jam. One day I'm gonna have an amazing garden with a briar patch. Right now, I don't have the house for it, but I know I will one day. Again, you guys, I'm just painting that first light layer. A lot of water on my brush. You never want so much water that's dripping off, but I have a good amount of water on here. Okay, and then that's a little too saturated, so I'm adding more water. Now we're coming to our last little section here. You could even do just a tiny bit right here. All right, and now we have to think about that pattern. So we would have another red line coming down here. And those would actually, let's see, my brain is having to work really hard right now. These would technically be our darker squares. So we'll come back and make those darker. But for now, we need to see what could we touch next. I think we're gonna have to let this dry for a second, and then we're gonna come back and we can start painting again. Looking good and dry. We can mix up a darker color for our jam. And again, I'm taking a little bit of indigo and red. It's kind of a purpley color. Maybe this isn't exactly strawberry jam now. Maybe it's more like grape or raspberry, I don't know. Doesn't matter. Okay, I can tell that this size 6 is going to be too big, so I'm gonna grab a size 4 brush. And I wanna think about this jar and where the colors would kind of change a little bit. I think here on the bottom, so I'm grabbing some pretty saturated paint. The bottom would definitely have a shadow, but maybe I leave a little line right here of just the white, or not white, but the lightest portion, and I'm gonna do that up here as well. Now you don't want this to dry, so grab your water and kind of start moving it around, and the same thing up here. Because if it dries, then it's just gonna be a really harsh line. And this is just to make it look like it's shining, kind of. And then we just are gonna come around the edge here where it would probably be a little darker, and here. Then I'm gonna rinse off my brush, and I'm getting just water. I'm just blending it in. If it's not blending, it means you didn't have enough water on your brush or you let it dry. That's the thing with watercolor, you gotta strike while the iron's hot or strike while the paper's wet, or you're not gonna be able to move it around. You can sometimes reanimate it with water, but I recommend getting used to when you paint, knowing that, okay, I don't want it to dry before I blend it. Just adding in a darker section here, coming across. And we wanna work fast because we want this to stay wet. Now, not too much water. You don't want puddles of water on here. But we want it to stay wet because we're gonna add in some shadows under where this fabric is, because there would definitely be shadows there. Okay, that's looking good. I made a mistake here. I should not have cut off right here because that looks kind of funky, but live and learn. I should have made it come all the way up like that. I'm going to actually just erase those by moving, because my paper and my paint is still wet, I can just move those around. Okay, I'm fine with that. What I can do instead is rinse off my brush, dry it off. I have no paint on it, and just pull a highlight. That's another way that you can do it. And it's really a lot softer, but because the paper is wet, it kind of tends to move around a little bit. Okay, while the paper is still wet, grab some of your more saturated dark shade and just lightly tap it in up here where the fabric is, where there would be a shadow. And this is wet on wet technique. It's lovely because the watercolor paper is wet, the paint's wet, and it just blends in really nice. And then I want to do the same thing down here where there would probably be a shadow. There's so many ways, you guys, that you can do watercolor. Like, you could spend another hour just on this part. We're not going to do that here because I don't want to bore you, but there's so much you can do to add layering and more and more and more depth. I'm going to also take my dry brush and just pull a highlight here because it's calling to me. I think that this is the roundest part of the jar and it gives it some depth. Okay. All right. Our jam is looking good. Now we want to come back up and let's work on this pattern that we have here. We are going to grab our more saturated reds. This is going to be our base layer. So I don't want this thing to leak. This right here is going to be that color, and we're just going to leave that as is. Again, if we wanted to spend a lot more time on this, we could go in again and put another layer if we wanted to, but for today, we're not going to put another layer. We're going to start working on this layer. It's more saturated, and we're going to grab that same color. I was using Scarlet Lake, but I'm gonna just soften it up a little bit with, I don't know what red this is. I think it's like Rose Madder or something. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm the worst about telling you guys what color paint I'm using because, I mean, look at my color palette. You think I know? I have no idea. I know what some of them are, but it's more just looking at it. Okay. Now I have my size 2 brush. You might want to use a smaller one, and I'm going to come in and make those darker squares. So it's going to be a light square, a dark square, a light square, a dark square. And I hope I did this right. So this is very, very saturated. It is kind of one tone, right? Because I'm just painting, this is the thick paint, like butter almost. If you don't like that look, feel free to come in and you can pull a highlight out. Remember, this is fabric, so for things to look a little funky, that's okay. And then there's probably one right here. I don't know why, but things like this make my mind feel like it's in a, like all twisted when I have to do stuff like this. I don't know, it just gets to me. I am going to pull up a little bit of the color here because as I can see, it is looking a little flat. Again, just using that technique that I just showed you guys to rinse off your brush and then pull up a highlight. We're just gonna keep going. So now, let's see. What would be happening here? So this would be a dark square. And another thing you can do is you can outline it and then rinse off your brush, grab just water and move it around. I actually kind of like that look more. Maybe we'll start doing that for all of them. Okay, and then down here, make sure you're painting around the little rope or twine, whatever you want to call it. And then this would be our red square. Yeah, like I'm second guessing myself a lot right now, but hopefully it works out. I can, like driving, I know where to go if I've been there once. My brain just figures it out so fast, but there's just something about like this kind of stuff. I don't know, is this geometry or something? I don't know. Like, am I messing it up? I'm getting so scared. All right. Also, it's not the end of the world if you mess it up. If you want to give that little rope some texture, paint kind of a little scallop edge around it. Okay, then we got this one. If you guys are participating in the 31 days of autumn, do you have any prompts that you're super excited about? Maybe that will be my next tutorial. Okay, then there would be one here, I think. And then there should have been one up here. Dum dum dum. Uh-oh. See, I did something wrong. That's okay. Or at least I think I did. Who knows? Who knows? I don't know what's happening with the color over here, but it's getting kind of messed up. Okay. That's that. That's that. I think it would be red over here, right? Uh-oh. That would be white. No, this would be red. Are you guys having a harder time as I am? I've tried to do this as a pattern design, and every time it just mind boggles me. Why did I choose this for the tutorial? I'm just kidding. I think we're doing good. We're doing good. This one's red. It's coming together. And if it's not perfect, that's okay. Okay, and then, right. This would be red. Okay, it looks cute. I think we're in the clear. And the amazing part is this took us so long that now this is probably almost dry. Oh, it's not dry. Okay, if there's any other squares that you think need a little help, I can tell that these got really unsaturated and I wanted it to look a little more saturated, so I might just add in a little more color. And I also want to make sure that they look like the same color, because somewhere down the line, something got mixed up a little bit with that. Okay. Man, I should have done a tutorial on just that. All right. That looks good. Now we're gonna go back down to the bottom of here, which is dry now. And we are going to grab a little bit of a darker shade of blue, that bluish gray. And I'm just going to, I'm not gonna make a line through the whole thing, Put just a small line here, another one here. Draws your eye across it, but you don't want just a fat line. And then I like to put just a little shadow here. Maybe mix it around with some water. My dog is just staring at me. She probably thinks I'm crazy. And then a line here and a little line there. And maybe just a touch underneath here as a shadow. Okay, this is wet, this is wet, this is wet. So we can't do a whole lot here. We can't do that, but we could put on our little label, and I am going to make this. I was going to just leave this, but because my pencil line is so thick, I'm going to make a line around it to cover that up, and we'll just pretend like that is how the label was designed. So I have a really small brush. This is a 3/0. It is a great details brush. It's from the Pigeon Letters, cruelty-free. I am not a sponsor. I used to be, but I'm not anymore. But they really are great brushes. I'm just saying that so you don't think I'm trying to sell you something. Okay. This nice little line. Sometimes when you're trying to draw a straight line with watercolor and a brush, you don't have to try to do it all in one swoop. You can do like this, okay? Like doop, doop, doop. Sometimes that's helpful. All right. And then because we're still waiting for everything else to dry, I'm gonna just write a little something in there. What do I want it to say? I want it to say beignets. That's the name of my dog. It's gonna be her favorite jam. She doesn't eat jam, by the way. I'm like a crazy dog mom, and her food is, she eats better than me. Let's just say that. Okay. So beignet. I'm gonna say strawberry. Obviously, you guys, I don't put pressure on yourself to write this in some super nice writing. I was a calligrapher for many years, and even this is not perfect looking, so just do what you can. And plus, it's so in style, that messy handwriting look right now. It's in my template shop. It's so popular. Okay, we're gonna put strawberry and then jam. There we go. Okay, and I'm gonna do a little dot and a little dot. All right, that looks good. I might put just a little darker edge down here, maybe over here. We can't really touch this yet, huh? Yeah, it's still wet, but we can come up here to our twine. I want to give this some depth, but I don't want to spend a ton of time on it. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to mix up a color that's slightly darker beige. And I have my little details brush. And I'm going to come along the bottom of this thread, and I'm making a line. You don't want a ton of water on your brush because this is such a tiny little area, but you do want this to be wet. Otherwise, it's not gonna blend when we need it to blend. So I'm just making this little line at the bottom. Then I'm rinsing off my brush. I'm grabbing just water and just lightly adding water to blend it, but not all the way up to the top, because I still want that to be our lightest area at the top. And then I'm just coming in here with little darker paint and just tapping it in so it blends. And that creates depth, like really easily, right? I think it looks amazing. Grabbing that same color, we're gonna do the same thing to this little bow here. On the inside, I'm just painting a thin line, rinsing off my brush, grabbing just water, and again, not going all the way up to the top here, but just lightly blending it. And since that's wet, I can grab a little bit darker color and lightly poke it in. And we can't really do the same thing to this one underneath right now. We could do it here, but because it's wet, we don't want it all to blend together, but we could do it right here. Rinse off our brush. Just add a little water, working real tiny. And as long as these don't touch, we actually can just put a little dark shadow right there. Okay. We're getting close, you guys. Now, let's see here. What can we touch? I think we can come in and add some shadows into this little top piece. Actually, we're gonna wait on that. We are gonna do one last round to add some depth to the actual jam. Go back to that color that you have for the jam and add a little more. You can either add a little black, or I like to add more indigo so it's a deeper purple and more saturated. And this is actually getting to be way too purple, so I had to bring some more red in. And this is really bright to me, so I'm gonna bring in a little bit of green. I know that sounds weird, but it will probably mellow it out a little bit. Maybe slightly. Okay. And I am going to get that saturated color. And where I think there would be more shadows in here, I'm going to paint that. So there would be a shadow down here. Now this is thick paint, you guys. You do not want to let it dry. So I'm gonna rinse off my brush, grab just water, and come in here while it's wet and move it around. Now we did lose that highlight that I had here, but we can always bring it back. And I'm gonna pretend like there's a light source coming over here. So most of the shadows are gonna be on the left side. Remember, we don't want puddles of water. If you see puddles, rinse off your brush, dry it off, pick up the puddles, or grab a paper towel. But know if you grab a paper towel, it's probably gonna take up some of the paint too. We're gonna do this edge dark, because this is where our major shadow is. Rinse off our brush and just start like toothbrush, blending it around. Now, I don't think this looks like strawberry jam anymore, but that's okay. Now, I say now so much, I'm so sorry. Grab your brush, rinse it off. We're working with that dry brush and pulling a highlight, okay? Come in here, just pull up some of that paint. So we have that beautiful highlight still. And then I want there to be some shadows under here. I'm just making a nice line under here because this would be shadowed. This is where the fabric is coming over. Rinse off your brush, have some water on it, not too much water, and then lightly move that around. And then you're just smoothing out that edge. And there's a dog hair in my paint. Okay. Beautiful. Our jam jar is looking good. We have a nice highlight right here. If you feel like maybe you need to, you can grab that dry brush and pull up right there. I think I'm going to. Love it. This is looking so cute, in my opinion. Now back to our pattern. I think what I need is a little lines to kind of outline it a little bit. Grab that red color that you had and maybe just mute it down a little bit with a little black. And I'm just going to reiterate this pattern by making a line. You don't have to do this, but I think it might make it just look that much better. Yeah, it needed a little something. Maybe even out here a bit. Okay. It looks a little more contained now. It wasn't looking contained to me. Now let's get in, I said it again, I said now. Let's get into our twine. We want to give it that look of twine. You know how it's twisted kind of? We are going to grab a brown, similar to what we used here, but darker. And that is we're going to make those little C curves, and it's going to make it look similar to the texture of that twine. So I have my tiniest brush, and I'm just making C curves. They don't have to be perfect. Your eye will automatically just draw to them. I made a little darker area right here because this is where it's tied. Then I'm gonna do the same thing on these guys. And if everything's starting to look the same, rinse off your brush, get a little more water, make some of them a little darker pigment, but just remember it's that C curve. And I can see that this needs a little darker shading on the inside because it kind of lost it. So you can just add that in. I'm going to do the same thing over here. All right. And just once more, I'm going to make a little darker line underneath here. This is looking really good, but before we're done, I want to add a little more shadows in this fabric because right now it looks really flat. How I'm going to do that is I'm going to grab that red color, but then mute it down with a little black. And this is really light, watered down. Oh, is this wet still? Okay, I think we're good. Where it curves up, I'm just going to put a little painted section. It's like a little dome shape. Can be really light. It doesn't need to be super heavy. Make it over here. There we go. And the last one is just underneath here. I grabbed a little bit too much blue, but this would technically have a little shadow as well. It's going to reanimate the paint. You need to work quickly. There's gonna be a little bleeding, but that's okay. You can always grab a dry brush, kind of pull it up if you need to. But that just gives it, looks like it's kind of wrapped around. And there we go. That is our jam jar. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Please share your work on Instagram and tag me at lavender&c. It makes my day to see that you followed my tutorial and to see what you created. And if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comment section. Also, like and subscribe this video, and I hope you have an amazing day.